Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Christopher Holmes, host for this episode and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Today, I am joined by none other than Dr. Leona Johnson, who is a professor, mentor, and researcher. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I think I'm sitting in front of greatness, so I can't wait to get this interview started and have you share with our viewers and our listeners. So I want to start by having you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about your background. Where does it all begin for you?
So it actually all began for me in the Deep South, in a rural town. Actually, it's a town, not a city. It's a town called Natchez, Mississippi. So I grew up in Natchez, Mississippi, and around the age of 13 or so, I figured out that I really needed to have some goals. I needed to have a profession, and I needed to go to college. And so I matriculated at Jackson State University, and then I worked in corporate America for a couple of decades or so. And it was during the time that I worked in corporate America that I really began to think about my passion, about what it is that I wanted to be in life. And I had studied psychology at Jackson State University, but had not had it in high school. So when I went to Jackson State, I majored in what I thought I knew best, and that was modern foreign languages, but I was always interested in psychology. And so it was during corporate America that I actually attained an MBA, because that was part of my job, and then a second master's and a PhD at Howard University over a couple of decades or so. After that, I knew that I wanted to always give back, and I knew that I was going to teach at HBCU. I knew I had to. And so I began my career at Howard University. I attained my second master's and my PhD at Howard University. And so it was there that my career starting in teaching as an adjunct faculty member, then on to Hampton University, and now to the highest of all the hills here in Florida, FAMU.
Awesome. So you've pretty much been consistent throughout in this story. You attended undergraduate at an HBCU. You continue to go on to an undergraduate in higher ed and in your higher degrees. Why was this so important for you?
It was just so, well, I did attend a PWI for my MBA, but you are correct. I have been educated at 2 HBCUs, and I have served at 3 HBCUs. So it was important to make a difference, to give back. Though I come from a very humble family, I also have a trailblazer in my family, Mary Wiley Washington. She was the first Black female CPA in the United States of America. So in addition to my father, who was my role model, I just knew that if they could do it, that I could do it. Coming from where I was, if they could do it, man, I could do it. And so it wasn't only about being educated, and I was educated well, but the fact that I realized as I was being educated, I needed to pay this back. I want my ancestors to look good and feel good about me. I know they're always with me, but it was just so important to give back to those who gave to me. I'm a first generation college student. And so there are many, many, many African Americans and others who have modeled and shaped me into the person that I am. So it was my way of understanding that I needed to pay it forward, and that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I know that you still encounter many students we still are saying first generation college students. Here we are years later, and we're still saying they're the first in their family to attend a college or university. How special is that for you to teach these kids that are changing the generations that will come after them?
It is very special. At the school that I teach at, I'd say maybe a third or so of the students are. So I can identify with that, and I know they can identify with me. And so I stand before them. It's very special because I can feel I know what they're going through.
Yeah.
because I did the same thing. And so I'm empathetic to their needs.
Yeah.
I am a very student focused faculty member, and I'm strict, but I also show my students that I really do care about them. And I think all of that goes back to being a first generational college student and knowing that many of my students, many of them are in the same situation. And I tell them all the time, and I say, look, if it wasn't for a scholarship at Jackson State University, I wouldn't even be standing before you. So I'm hoping that I serve as a role model. And I'm hoping that even people in my family, like my sister, say, well, if you could do it, I could do it. And so I want my students to see that they indeed are, they can do it.
Yeah. Now let's go back just a little bit to this modern foreign language degree that you that you have. And so you get the degree, you say, you know what, I need to go into corporate America and I need to work for a while and get my ground and get my footing together. And then you transition back into school. Was that a hard decision to make?
It wasn't hard because I knew it was. I meditated about this. I prayed about this. It was scary. It was courageous. Because I was at a certain age that I won't say, going back to school. And some people thought, well, what if you don't make it? Well, you know, I'm going back to school and I'm going back for a purpose. And I think that is so important. We need to know, and it's okay. It's okay to come full circle. I've actually come full circle. I am not the 27, 30-year-old PhD who like moves through seamlessly. So I did go back. That was very, it was very courageous, I will say, but I had a goal. I had a goal in mind, and that was to get my credentials so that I could go teach at an HBCU. And luckily, I've been able to do that.
Yeah. So you got the degree in modern language, knowing that you really had a passion for psychology. And you went back and now you have this degree, or you have now the expertise in education psychology. What was it about psychology that you love so much?
Psychology is fascinating because it's all around us. It's in our everyday lives. I mean, why do we do what we do? That's what psychology teaches us. And so while we may have these concepts about psychology, these concepts about behavior, it's the actual discipline that gives us those, that gives it meaning. And so I've always been fascinated about psychology. I just didn't know, because at my high school, the only other courses that were being taught were things like modern foreign language and business. And so I didn't know until I came to Jackson State and had my first course in psychology. And it was my course in educational psychology at Jackson State that I actually became attuned to what educational psych was. And actually, based on that, ultimately decided that educational psychology is what I'm going to do. And so I went back to Howard, and over a decade or so, I want to say that doing my matriculation at Howard, I worked full time.
Yeah.
I worked full time. I did other obligations in the community, like church, of course. I'm the daughter of a Baptist minister and president of a sorority chapter. So I did all of these things, matriculating at Howard and working full time.
Wow. So you mentioned Jackson gave you the understanding of educational psychology. So share with the viewers and listeners, what is educational psychology?
So really, honestly, if you know psychology, then it's really applying the principles of psychology to education, to the classroom, for example, to a school, etc. But you're really applying psychological principles to education. For example, some of the neat things that we learn about is how do students learn?
Yeah.
What are their cognitive learning styles? How do they learn best? What's involved in their learning? So it's fascinating because you're applying all that you know about psychology to the field of education, which, as you know, is very, very broad.
Yeah. So when you think about the needs of students, what is one thing that you recommend to your colleagues or to other people that serve students that help to meet their unique and individualized needs? We know diversity now is so broad, even among just, we're talking about Black students, we're not talking about a set of students. These students come with a special set of needs. They come from various cultures. So what is it that we need to address when we are teaching this wide span of students?
You need to know who you're teaching. Who are your students?
Yeah.
What are their needs? And so what I have found that I had to do was through professional development, through talking to students themselves, focus groups. I've just had to really learn who are they?
Yeah.
What is it? So if you know who they are, then that helps you kind of get to what their needs are. We have to know, for example, how do they learn? How do they prefer to learn? So what you need to know in addition is, how do they prefer to learn? You are teaching them, so how do they prefer to learn? So how do you know that? And I know very easily. I give at the very beginning of my classes, my students have to do a learning style assessment, so that not only do I know how they like to learn, but I know how I teach, and we can see if there is some balance with teaching styles and learning styles. And it's really, really interesting. Some students will have an idea of how they like to learn, and some will be totally surprised. So it's really important to administer a learning style assessment. And it's also important to know, what is the research saying?
Yeah.
In addition to professional development classes, what is the research saying about the students, about this particular class, these students who are going to be graduating in 4 years? What does the research say? What does the research say about them, about their needs? So you may find that you need to do a little work there, but it's definitely well worth it.
So now let's talk about this, because I do believe that's so important. And what I also see is when you do that for students, they're also better able to advocate for themselves in various courses to say, when you taught this way, I kind of understood it, but could you possibly do X, Y, and Z? And that empowers your students. Do you think students feel comfortable talking to professors about what their needs are and how to go about meeting that? Because we know adults sometimes don't always want to do the extra work, right? So do you think that's more powerful for the students, or how do they handle that because you give them those tools?
Yes, and I give them those tools, and I say, by the way, not only do I give them the tools, but once they understand what their style is, their learning preference, I literally give them additional information to tell them, and I place it on Canvas, and I say, all right, so if you are an auditory learner, then these are the characteristics of this type of learning style, but here are the learning strategies that work for you. So I give them everything that I can, and then we talk about it, and I try to make them comfortable. I'll say, so based on what you all submitted, my assessment of the class is that you are, you have a dominant auditory or whatever. And so these are the kinds, so I go over that again. And, I attempt to make them very, feel comfortable in just talking to me just in general. I try to cover these kinds of things in class, so that if they have, just to evoke some questions, and if they have the questions, because they need to come back to you. You need to have them thinking about it. And so I let them know that by all means, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So those things are important. How have you, in a sense, pivoted to meeting these students' needs since we've been in this pandemic, and they may not have always been right in front of you?
Actually, that was a challenge, but it was an opportunity.
Yeah.
So what I did is I found myself, I tend to be fairly strict. I found myself being more flexible. When I say more flexible, I mean more flexible to the deadlines, more flexible in how I might give them an assignment. Whereas I might have you write a term paper, I might give you something that accomplishes the context of a term paper, but I understand that we're in this pandemic. And so I have taught differently.
Yeah.
I've had to engage them differently on Zoom. And they will tell you, and you have to create. And it's definitely in some cases more work, but I actually found myself, and I was fairly successful. The students did say yes, and you did engage us, but engaging them on Zoom is not like engaging them on the class. So I had to come up with some techniques, and I will say it was trial and error, of course, what works, what doesn't work, but I found myself doing new things.
That's amazing. I mean, life is about growing. Even in the profession of education, we need to be stretched and to do things that we didn't want to do on our own, but the pandemic made us do it. So I think that's awesome. I know that you also mentor, not just students, but young faculty. How do you feel about that? Why do you do it? And then what is the level of enjoyment you get out of it?
Well, first of all, we're always learning. I'm a lifetime learner, and I think most of us as professors, teachers, researchers, we're constantly learning.
Yeah.
So I learn from them, and they learn from me. And trust me, there are times when I might learn something from them. I might have a question for them, especially in this techie savvy world that we have. Yeah. And so it's a give and take where I learn as well. And so that's very, very rewarding.
So I know that I read that you have several research interests. Which one would you say is the nearest to your heart?
So the closest to my heart would definitely be culture and learning.
Okay.
The impact that culture has on learning. Because culture is who we are. I remember growing up in rural Mississippi when I felt honestly very deprived. I felt very deprived. And so it always made me want to know about what people in other cultures experience. How do they experience it? So that was the beginning of that. And then when I got to Howard University and I had to select a dissertation or dissertation topic, it was very clear that students, we're multicultural. We learn in different ways. We have learning preferences that are similar, but then that are not similar. And so I am fascinated by the various ethnicities, including mainstream America, and how culture has impacted all of us, especially in the multicultural world that we live in now.
Yeah.
And so as an educational psychologist, I basically have a double whammy because I'm interested in culture and learning, and that based on learning preferences, but I get a chance as a researcher and a professor to actually conduct research right here at FAMU, right at Hampton University, on topics in educational psychology. Like, for example, how do students perceive the various learning modalities? We have hybrid now. In the pandemic, it was the online, mm-hmm. and it was the in-person. So what is their opinion about, or their attitude about these different types of modalities? How does that influence their academic performance? Yeah. And so that topic actually was able to get a grant at FAMU, and I actually have a manuscript that I wrote in that regard, and there's a publication coming out about that actually this fall.
Awesome. And the other good thing about that is when you get those grants and you conduct research, you give your students an opportunity to do work outside of the classroom for those that work alongside you, which I think is awesome at HBCUs, because you often see it sometimes at PWIs that are doing the research, but here you mm-hmm. are bringing the research back to these students that are well-deserving, just like any other student.
Absolutely. And, they get excited too. They want to participate in the study. We actually had undergrads and graduate students who worked with us as we implemented the grant.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So you lived this life in higher ed. You've done some work actually in corporate America. What is one thing you wish you would have known earlier on in your career as it relates to education psychology and working in higher ed?
So what I wish that I would have done is I had these great mentors. I mean, I had multiple mentors, but I wished I had maximized my knowledge on what is the academy like? What is it really like? So I didn't do that. I didn't maximize my learning about beyond what I was working on with them. You know, they mentored me through this dissertation process, and so that's how I use them. And I just wish that I knew that I wanted to go to the academy. I knew I wanted to go to an HBCU and teach, but I wish I had just asked them,
Yeah.
talk about those experiences and ask them for their wisdom in that regard. And I didn't, but now I know that for like the students that I'm mentoring now, like the graduate students here at FAM, you know, I even tell my students in class, look, you all, I didn't know this, but you all need to think about this, having that global picture. And so I wish I would have had that global picture.
So would that be the piece of advice that you give somebody that wants to pursue a career in ed psych at the higher level?
I would say to them, get some teaching experience in ed psych if you can. See, I did not do the graduate assistantship to do the teaching. I was the expert who walked into the classroom.
Yeah.
So I would advise students to get as much teaching experience as you can, as a GA, for example, but get as much teaching experience as you can. So that there's some things you're going to know already. I mean, you're going to learn these things. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you're going to know. I mean, you're going to learn it. But if you can get this information earlier and think about it, get that global picture, I think that it would be beneficial. But you know, we always persevere, and we get it. Yeah.
Eventually we get it.
We get it.
Well, let me ask you this. And I know you talked about going to work and then going back to school, and there's a lot of things that probably happened. What has been one of your biggest challenges, and how did you overcome it?
So actually, that was my biggest challenge to over a decade or so. Attain 3 degrees, including the MBA, second master's and PhD, work full time. Wow, that was tough. That was tough because you're working on this dissertation and you're at work and you got to get the work done first. I mean, you got to get the work done because you don't get the work done, you don't have a paycheck. You can't even get your education. So, you know, I'd be thinking about, oh, I really need to do this, and you know, I need to do that. And it's like, I can't get to it now. But then it also, even though that was difficult, knowing, okay, I'm home now I can hit that dissertation. So although it was challenging, and it was challenging, over a decade of in that type of routine, it's a long time.
It's a long time.
It's a long time, but you have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had to say, sorry, can't go to this house party. Can't go here, can't do that. And so you have to prioritize. And so that's what I did. But that's, you know, when you're sacrificing, that's rough too. But then at the end comes the reward. And so that makes it all, you know, all worth it.
I think that's the learning lesson. You just said it right there, for people, is that you have to be willing to sacrifice. Many of us want to be so comfortable in everything that we do, but I don't think the growth really comes to you until you're willing to open up to sacrifice and to let some stuff go.
Exactly.
But you also said this, is that you had a goal.
Yes.
And so no matter what, the goal was your top priority, even if it meant to have to sacrifice. And I think that's important.
Exactly. I put it in this order: motivation, got to be motivated, hard work. Oh, you got to work very hard. You got to work very hard. You might have to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and then do. And by the way, I still do that. I still do that.
Yes.
So the rigor that forced me into that type of routine, I still do it today. And I get things done. And the perseverance, you got to stick it out. You got to stick it out.
And I think the other thing is you're just dropping so many nuggets, you don't even know that you're doing it.
No.
But I think what you're also encouraging people, or what you're making people aware, is that when you go and you get a PhD or a master's or MBA from a university like Howard, it's not easy. It is just as rigorous as going to a Harvard or an Oxford or a Yale or your state university. It is rigorous instruction, and you're going to come out having learned and done the work like most people, and you deserve opportunities like everyone else because you work so hard.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Howard University taught me well. It taught me well. Actually, it helped me teach at HBCUs because the kinds of things and the type of knowledge that I got, I mean, you have to know these things. You have to know, who the GOAT is in Black developmental psychology. And I learned who these GOATs were.
Yeah.
And not only that, but I read it and I know it. It taught me psychology. Like I always tell my students, when you walk out of this class, you got to have something up here. You got to have it up here. And so you stick to it and you walk out of there knowing. Because if you don't know, how are you going to teach somebody else if you don't know? I mean, you can't like study this stuff. I mean, really, so you have to know it. And so I am very thankful for the Jackson State and the Howard University because I learned and my professors taught me well. Awesome. And they were interested. They were
committed to you.
Yes. I felt like we were a family.
Yeah. I feel that, and I feel you giving that back to your students right now as well. Very accountability, but very familiar as well. And excellent. I think that makes a difference. So we talked about your challenges. What is your biggest accomplishment to date?
Okay, so my biggest accomplishment to date is the fact that I, as a faculty member, have come full circle. By that, I mean, after teaching those 15 years or so at Hampton University, my colleagues, and I tell my students in a few years, and they look at me like, really? You're going to be my colleagues. You're going to be my colleagues. And, I try. That's the whole thing about trying to give them the big picture, the global picture. I in many ways, somehow failed to get that. But at any rate, the biggest success for me is the fact that I have former students who are clinical psychologists, who are attorneys, who are medical doctors. I would like to think, and some of them kind of did more of it on their own, but some of them I did play a little part in that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really excited about that. When I actually came to FAMU, you always need these recommendations. Some of my former students were my recommenders.
Wow.
Full circle.
Wow.
That's full circle.
That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you one last question before we get ready to wrap up. Where do you go from here? What's next? Where do you see yourself going?
That's a really good question. I always, even at Hampton University, I used to say, I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. But I would like to continue doing what I'm doing now. I didn't mention that I serve as the undergraduate program coordinator for our psychology department at FAMU.
Awesome.
And so I want to continue doing that, and I want to continue teaching, and I want to actually do more writing. I mean, I'm doing it, but I want to do more writing in the educational psychology. And now that we have the COVID-19, how does COVID-19 impact learning? How does it impact students? So that is very, very right now. The book that I wrote on culture and learning at Howard, I actually co-wrote a book on culture and learning, what we know about learning as it relates to the various ethnic groups.
Mm,
That was based on the literature. So I would like to take that forward in a larger way, perhaps with some empirical research.
yeah. I mean, the time is now. There
Yes.
is a sense of awareness now with diversity and equity and culture, cultural sensitivity and education. So get to writing. They're waiting on you to write it. The time is now. Seize the moment.
Yes, absolutely.
So, how has your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network enhanced your career?
I've not been a member for a very, very long time, but I have had wonderful opportunities to do presentations. And when I'm doing the presentations, I'm meeting undergraduates. And the topics that I have presented are the kinds of topics that are very informational for their future career growth. But to be able to present that,
Yeah.
first of all, to be able to present my research, but to be able to present this research to students who are also going to be moving along in the path that I am, is just it's almost like I'm giving back again.
Yeah.
And to present this work and to talk to them and meet them has been very rewarding for me. I certainly hope it has been for them.
Oh, I'm sure it has been. I don't doubt that at all. Well, Dr. Johnson, I want to thank you for joining me today. It has truly been a pleasure. I'm definitely going to connect with you so we can talk more about the work that you do, because I'm so interested in it, and it's connected to what I do as a consultant. Will you please tell our viewers and listeners where they can go and learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Okay, so for now, you can check out FAMU Psychology Department. You'll see my information there. You'll see information from LinkedIn. I am typically presenting at the Association of Black Psychologists, the NSSA. So those are some of the places, but to get in contact with me, actually, if you can check out the FAMU Psychology website, and you'll see my contact information there.
Awesome.
And so,
awesome. Well, you guys be sure to check her out. Go find her, go follow her, and stay abreast of what she's doing, because she just told you, and I just put it into the atmosphere, the writings are coming, the research is going to be there. So you want to be connected to Dr. Leona Johnson. Please be sure to stay connected to the Black Doctoral Network and connect with us on all of our social media channels. Thank you for joining us today for the Black Doctors Talk podcast. We hope you will join us again next time. But for now, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to tell a friend.